Hey guys, you wish you could learn to sew and design your own clothes? Well, now you can. No experience needed. Go sign up for our free trial at sewitacademy.com. Peace. Hi guys, Mimi G here. Today we're going to be doing a sew along to my new early fall pattern 8959. Now if you're not new to sewing but you may need a refresher, I suggest you watch the Sewing Basics video linked in the description box below. If you are new to sewing, we have an online sewing and design school that is perfect for you. You should head over and check it out at sewitacademy.com. Alright guys, so we're working on Simplicity 8959 and we're going to start by doing the vest, which is view B. So on the back of the envelope, you guys should know that you will find a list of suggested fabrics and notions that you're going to need. So let's go over the pieces that we're going to need to cut. You're going to need to cut pattern piece number 11. You're going to be cutting 2 of fabric, 2 of lining, and 2 of interfacing. This is our midriff. You're going to need to cut 1 on the fold of fabric, 1 on the fold of lining, and 1 on the fold of interfacing of pattern piece number 12, which is the back midriff. You're going to need to cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing of pattern piece number 8, which is our under collar. You're going to cut 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing, both on the fold of pattern piece number 7, which is our upper collar. You're cutting 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing of pattern piece number 9, which is our front facing. You're also going to cut 2 of pattern piece number 10, which is the bodice front lining. You're going to cut 1 on the fold of fabric of pattern piece number 6, which is our bodice back. You're also going to cut 1 on the fold of lining. You're going to cut pattern piece number 5, which is our bodice front. You're going to cut 2. You're going to cut 1 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of lining of pattern piece number 14, which is our peplum back. And you're cutting 2 of fabric and 2 of lining of pattern piece 13, which is our peplum front. All right, so we're going to start with the front piece. So you should go ahead and stay stitch the front. You should also stay stitch where your dart is and then gather the bottom in between your notches because this gets gathered onto the midriff. So I've already done that for both of my pieces. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my back piece and we're going to pin at the shoulder. So with right sides facing. Once you have both your shoulders pinned, go ahead to your sewing machine and stitch across the top of each shoulder using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have your shoulders sewn together and pressed, you can go ahead and grab your under collar and with right sides facing and matching that double notch at the center back, you're going to go ahead and pin. Now head over to your sewing machine and you're just going to stitch these together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, then press your seam open. Okay, once you have your under collars sewn together and your seams pressed open, we're gonna go ahead and pin this to the front of our vest. So you should have marked your little dots and you should also have a notch. That's what you're gonna use to align the notch and the 2 dots that you see on your collar. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and attach our collar to the front of our vest, but first we're gonna go ahead and slash to our dot where that dart is. So don't go past your stitching. You're gonna do that on both sides. Now we're gonna go ahead and pin our collar to our vest. So you're going to match your single notch that's on your front and also on your collar, and you're going to also make sure that your dots align. So I'm going to pin at my notch first and then through my dots. And you're going to pin the other side the same way. Then you're going to stitch between your dots. So from dot to dot, you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, go ahead and press your seam open. Do not trim. Now we're going to go ahead and pin the rest of this to our vest. So I'm going to match up the 2 notches at the center back. And what we're going to do is pin at the shoulder. So you should have a dot that lines up to your shoulder. Now we're going to go ahead and make that dart. So I'm going to pin. Okay, now you're going to go to your sewing machine. What I like to do is I start at the center back and I work my way to the end of this dart in one continuous stitch. Then I start back in the center and work my way down to the other end of the dart. Okay, once you have your collar sewn, I want you to clip wherever you need to so that you can release some of this tension in the curve area. And then head to your ironing table. I want you to press your seams open. Okay, let's go ahead and set this aside for a second. We're going to grab our front facing and our front lining. So before we start pinning, you want to go ahead and make the darts in your front lining pieces. And then with right sides facing, we're going to go ahead and pin, matching our notches. Now, if you have a fabric that does not have any give, you might want to go ahead and do the ease stitching onto your front facing piece. My fabric has some give, so I'm not going to go ahead and do that. But like I said, if your fabric does not have any give, I would suggest you doing it. I'm going to go ahead and pin at my notches. Once you have it pinned, you can go ahead and stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to attach your other front lining to your front facing the same way. All right, once you've sewn your lining front to your front facing, I went ahead and pressed my seams. Now, as you can see, I have pinned right sides facing, my fronts to my back at the shoulders. Go ahead and stitch your shoulders, again, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead and attach our upper collar. All right, we're going to go ahead and attach our collar to our lining. I went ahead and also made my slits here to the dot. Make sure you don't go past your stitching. Now we're going to go ahead and pin our collar to our lining. So with right sides facing, what I like to do is pin at my shoulder. So you should have a dot just like we had for the front. Pin the center back notches. Now you're going to, again, match that double notch that you should have. So you have a double notch on your collar. You should have a double notch on your facing. Okay, once you have it pinned, again, I like to start in the center, work my way to one side, stopping at my dot, and then going again from the center in the other direction, and again, stopping at my dot. Okay, so starting in the center back and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to work my way through to one side, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. You're going to pivot. And you're going to end at your dart. You're going to do the same thing starting in the center and working your way in the other direction. Okay, I went ahead and finished sewing my collar onto my lining pieces. You want to make sure that you don't have any puckering or pleating at these corners. If you did, you may have had to open just a bit further on that slash that you did. Now we're going to go ahead and place right sides facing at our collar first, and we're going to pin. So I'm going to push my seam allowances down. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stitch our collars together first. So again, working from the center in one direction and then the other, you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to pivot at the corner and making sure are facing down, you're going to stop at your dot. All right, once your collar is stitched down, we're going to go ahead and stitch together the front part of our vest. So match up your notches. Again, if your fabric does not have any stretch, the pattern instructions tell you to go ahead and do some ease stitching, which you may or may not need to do depending on the fabric that you're using. And now what you're going to do is you're going to start at the bottom. You're going to work your way up to the dot. You're going to pivot, and then you're going to stitch until you meet your other dot. All right, guys, so you're going to go ahead and clip into your corners, trim your seam allowances, and now we're going to stitch together our armhole. So make sure that your shoulder seams are aligned and pin. Pin your single notch for the front, pin the back. And now you're going to go to your sewing machine and you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to do this for both sides. Okay, once you have your armhole sewn, we're going to go ahead and turn this right side out. So I'm just going to pull my front, do the back. And now before we go ahead and sew our side seams together, I want you to go ahead and poke out your corners and give this a really good press. All right, once you have it pressed, we're gonna go ahead and sew our side seams together. So what you're going to do is you're going to match up your seams and pin. Then you want to pin your notches. And you're going to do the same thing on the back. You're going to pin your other side seams the same way. Now we're going to stitch one continuous stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have your side seams sewn, go ahead, turn your garment right side out, give it a press. Now I want you to go ahead and do your gathering stitches through both layers of your back. So both your fabric and your lining. Between your notches, do 2 rows of gathering stitches. Now we're going to set this aside for just a second. We're going to grab our midriff and then we're going to gather our bodice onto that midriff. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and stitch these together at the side seams. So go ahead and pin and then stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press your seams open. Okay, so I went ahead and gathered the front so that it's the same as the darted lining that we have. So just gather it until it's the same exact size. You're going to do that on both sides. Then you're going to go ahead and gather your back. And now we're going to go ahead and pin our midriff to our bodice. So go ahead and match your side seams and pin there first. Your midriff is going to extend past your front. Match your notches. Once you have the entire thing pinned, you're going to stitch again, starting in the center back, working your way to one end, and then again center back the other end, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have your midriff sewn onto your bodice, you're going to go ahead and sew your other midriff pieces together, just like we did the first. But for this one, you're going to turn the hem allowance and press it. And now we're going to place it, sandwiching our vest in between our midriffs. We're going to go ahead and pin. Okay, once you have it pinned together, you're going to go ahead and sew through all layers, and you're going to also stitch across the front. So you're going to stitch the front closed using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, because this should have extended 5/8 of an inch, and then you're going to stitch along the entire midriff. Okay, now you're going to go ahead and trim this, and then you're going to turn it to the right side. Then I want you to press the entire midriff down away from the bodice. Okay, we're going to set this aside for just 1 second. You're going to go ahead and grab your peplum pieces, and you're going to place them right sides facing. Go ahead and match your side seam notches. I want you to go ahead and pin both side seams You're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I want you to grab your lining pieces, which are the same exact pieces, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to stitch both side seams together. All right, guys, once you have your peplums sewn at the side seams, I want you to lay them right sides facing the way I've done here. You're going to pin along the front and bottom, and you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I want you to trim your seam and turn this right side out. Okay, once you turn this right side out, I gave it a good press. I also went ahead and gathered in between my notches on both the front part of the peplum and also on the back of the peplum. So we're going to go ahead and pull our gathering stitches. And now we're going to pin this to our bodice. You're going to pin it to your midriff, but you're going to leave the one that was turned under and pressed loose. So you're only going to pin to one of your midriffs, and you're going to pin at your side seam first, just like we did before. Okay, now you're going to go ahead to your sewing machine, and just like we did before, you're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, guys, all that you have left to do is to hand stitch your midriff onto your vest and then make your buttonhole on the front, and you are all done. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that sew along, and make sure to tag us on Instagram at MimiGStyle. Until next time, peace.